We are 5 months out from the presidential election, and former President Trump is narrowing down his VP picks. Trump has requested vetting materials from 8 potential VP picks in no particular order. The list includes Senator Tom Cotton, Senator Marco Rubio, Representative Byron Donalds, Governor Doug Burgum, Senator Tim Scott, Senator J.D. Vance, Dr. Ben Carson making a comeback, and Representative Elise Stefanik. The list is, of course, subject to change, but it is the strongest indication yet of who's top of mind.
Reacting to the list, a senior Trump campaign advisor said in a statement, quote, "Anyone claiming to know who or when President Trump will choose his VP is lying unless the person is named Donald J. Trump." So, Stephen, where do we begin with this one? First of all, were there any big surprises on that list for you? Were you surprised by anyone's exclusion? Only one woman, I notice, Congresswoman Stefanik. Is that a notable thing?
The Republican war on women continues. No, I think there was a moment where there was discussion that Nikki Haley was going to be on the list, but there's too much interpersonal drama there. I was also sad to see that Tulsi Gabbard did not make the cut. I know she was kind of teasing for a little while that it was a possibility, and it would have been a very gonzo and strong ticket. So I think he has made a mistake by passing that one over. I know, really sad for Tulsi. But yeah, I think it's a pretty predictable list. I guess I just remain unconvinced that vice presidents matter that much anymore. I think that before television and social media, there was a certain power in a very effective senator from a swing state who everybody knows their name from the newspapers. And then they start voting for that ticket. But today it's just, kind of all the players in a way that people didn't used to. And I don't think it carries as much.
Yeah, I actually think that the local or state level element used to be much more important when it was a less homogenized country, and regional differences were more important, and all of that came into play a lot. The other thing that I would say is, we all love to play the sort of VP guessing game, and I get that. Like, I like
it's the only game we get to play.
Exactly, and I like the kind of, honestly, the kind of horse race or sport element of political and electoral coverage sometimes. But if you're asking me to put on my, most serious, earnest face, I do agree that I think it is increasingly unimportant. And the one thing I would say is, in former President Trump's case, I almost think it's unusually unimportant in his case, because he is such a massively polarizing figure. Yes, I get the argument for, say, a Nikki Haley. Would she reassure Trump skeptical Republicans or soft conservatives? But Donald Trump is still at the top of the ticket, and it is ultimately going to be a decision made on him against President Biden. Maybe a VP can, affect things very slightly around the edges, but Trump is such a dominant, for good or bad, personality that I'm skeptical how much difference it makes.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, you're also, maybe this is the old party mindset that doesn't exist anymore, where the party has a really tight control over its roster and who are going to be the next stars for the next election. But you're also elevating to the very top of the ladder who is going to be the next potential front runner for the presidency. And do I think J.D. Vance is ready to be that guy? Tom Cotton, who, he's an interesting senator. He has some very strong opinions that I agree with, but is that guy ready for prime time on the national level? I don't think he's ready to speak to the nation. And I also don't know anybody who's going to come into the fold for Donald Trump, for J.D. Vance, whose views he mostly shares at this point. Same for Tom Cotton on issues of law and order. And then Marco Rubio has moved firmly into Trump's camp when he used to be little Marco and very much more of a free market fundamentalist in the vein of AEI or something in Washington, D.C. The only person who rounds out Donald Trump's very divisive personality is Tim Scott. Not that he is a doormat necessarily, but he is very passive. He's almost too nice. And I think he will have a way of making people feel more comfortable with the Trump ticket if they weren't before.
So let's just be direct about it. Do you think that some of the reason Scott makes people feel more comfortable with the Trump ticket is because he's black?
No, I don't think so necessarily. I really do think that it is just he has a very charming, soft, and pleasant demeanor, and Donald Trump is total sandpaper. Do Republicans like to play the game where they go, look, we've elevated a black Republican, we're not a party that deals with racism? Absolutely. That is an element that goes on within Republican politics. But I actually really think it is about Tim Scott's demeanor and his almost lack of ambition, where he has done some work to get himself into the VEEP stakes. But I don't really think of him as being as ambitious and as much of a cutthroat as J.D. Vance or Stefanik.
That's really interesting you raised that, because I was thinking about that looking through the list just before you mentioned it. Someone like Marco Rubio, I think, pretty clearly does still harbour ambitions. Obviously ran against Trump in 2016, has, as you say, sort of comported himself in a far more Trumpian way to firstly earn re-election in an increasingly Trumpian party and state for that matter, but also to sort of advance himself. J.D. Vance was at one point a very strenuous Trump critic, certainly around the time his book came out and when he was doing sort of publicity for that, and has become the very opposite now. But I just wonder, given what we have all observed about Trump's personality, particularly over the course of his involvement in politics, does that weigh against those people in a way? Not that they have aligned themselves with him, but the sense is they have done so for reasons of personal ambition.
No, that's a great question, and maybe it reminds me of the predictability and the establishmentarian nature of Mike Pence. Donald Trump feels very strongly that he was betrayed by Mike Pence, who would not participate in overturning the election and participating in the January 6th insanity, and who has also taken to the stump and tried to run against him this year. So what is Donald Trump looking for in a VP? He doesn't want to repeat the Mike Pence thing. And honestly, I think Marco Rubio would probably be a repeat, meaning he's very conservative, he has a lot of shared views. But I think when rubber meets the road, when push comes to shove, Marco Rubio is not going to do anything to endanger the Republic in the kind of way that we saw at the end of the 2020 election. So is he looking for someone who is willing to do whatever he says? That might be what is his mindset in this search.
Sure, and that'll obviously be an issue. I have to say, just on the point of the search, I mean, I think it's fascinating that we have this list and that it has come out in public. I think, what we know about Trump is that he loves attention for a start, suspense, there's the whole reality TV thing. I would be amazed, if he announced a VP pick that early. I assume he's going to want to extend the speculation around it for as long as possible. And it also wouldn't surprise me if he chose somebody who's not on this list, who's just a bit more of a wild card candidate. It does interest me that now this list in a way is, I think, evidence also of how firm a grip Donald Trump has got on the GOP in a way that wasn't really the case in 2016. I mean, I remember, there'd been a lot of conversation in 2016 about whether people would actually accept to be his running mate because he was so obviously a controversial figure. We don't really ask that question of elected officials in the Republican Party anymore for the most part.
No, they have all fallen completely into line. SNL's skits on this have been hilarious. All the people who he has insulted and dragged over all the years, all the things, especially like Tim Scott, Marco Rubio, that they've been willing to do to just say, I will be your servant, I will work with you. Donald Trump is undefeated. And all of these people, if they want to have a future in Republican politics, they will fall in line.
And Nikki Haley is a curious case in that instance, because she has stood aside from that to a small degree. I mean, she has recently said she will vote for Trump in November. She was obviously his most serious rival in the primary, even though she didn't frankly get that close. But she said, rival with heavy inverted commas around it. But she seems to me to be sort of playing quite a curious game in perhaps trying to not be outright opposed to him anymore, but maybe preserve viability if he were to go down to defeat in November. Is that the Haley strategy, do you think? Sort of holding out, like, I'd be the not Trump if he loses this time, but I'm not going to put my head above the parapet just yet.
There have to be Republican politicians who are looking at the possibility that Donald Trump, is not able to complete the election or is in such dire legal, straits that he's not going to be the candidate. I think that that's still like a far-fetched possibility, but it's a possibility. And I think we've also, we've missed Byron Donalds here in this list. We've talked about Byron Donalds a little bit today. He is a black Republican. In many ways, if you think that the Republican Party and the Trump campaign is trying to play that same kind of, race and identity-based game with their pick, Byron Donalds does not have the same temperament as Tim Scott. He is not as much of an establishmentarian. And Byron Donalds, the way that I understand him to be, he might be more willing to go along with the entire Trump agenda, even when it gets a little crazy.
Interesting. Well, we shall see how that goes, but the VEEP stakes will continue for some time, and so will Rising after this.